Good evening. Thank you all for being here. I'm a first-generation Afghan born here in the US. My parents left, my entire family left after the first coup d'etat. They came here in 1974. And a lot of people in Afghanistan look at me and say, well, you're not Afghan, you're an American. And a lot of people here look at me and say, well, you're not an American, you're clearly from somewhere else. So, having grown up amidst those circumstances, I've gained an unusual insight that I think has become particularly beneficial lately. And it's funny because people ask me, they say, what do you think about the occupation, the American occupation of Afghanistan? And I find that somewhat amusing because it's very relative. To those who have recently started paying attention in the past 7 or 8 years, yes, it does look like an occupation. But to those of us that have grown up, I mean, that country has been at war since before I was born. So for those of us that have grown up and lived with the political realities of real occupations and wars and civil war and all the different things that have transpired there, this is a relatively peaceful and stable time. Although it's not perfect, it's the first time in my lifetime that I could even think about going there. It was never possible before 2001. And of course, there's a lot of work to be done. And there are so many flaws and errors and grievances being committed every day. But it has gone from all-out open warfare to a relative level of stability and calm. Girls are going to school. Things are going back to normal. The last time I was there this last spring, it had changed so very much since I was there in 2003, which was just 5 years. It had changed immensely. In 2003, when I was there, all you could see were the faces of war. There were people with at least one, if not more, limbs amputated. None with any kind of prosthetics, begging on the streets. I mean, it was everywhere. The buildings that were still standing were completely riddled in bullet holes and shelled out by rockets, if they were standing. All of that has been cleared away, for the most part, in Kabul, and there has been a great deal of reconstruction done. And the most positive thing that I noticed is that when you do speak to children and teenagers and young people, not only are they enrolled in public school, but they're taking 2 to 3 other vocational programs. They're learning foreign languages, they're learning computer skills. There's a great deal of positivity to be seen. With that said, what I did after the first time I visited was I was incredibly moved by the situation that I saw. In fact, I didn't want to come back. I wanted to stay there and felt like I needed to do something, but I knew that I could do a lot more as an educated person. I would have a lot more in my tool belt with the education than if I just stayed there. So in 2005, myself and a cousin of mine founded Omeid International, a human rights-based nonprofit operating here and in Kabul. And we were incorporated in 2005. And this past spring, we opened our doors to the Amin Institute. It's an orphanage and school and medical clinic where we have 10 children and 6 employees, and we're rehabilitating and sponsoring the lives of these 16 families, which I will get into a little bit more later. Off the top, just thinking about what I've learned from people there, I mean, I've talked to everybody from widows to beggars to street children to ministers in the Ministry of Defense, people who are training international forces, training Afghan police, working with ISAF. There's a great deal of opinion there that people share very openly. And one of the greatest pains and problems people have that I think is misunderstood here is that it's not that the people who join the ranks of the Taliban or that Afghans in general have just a natural hate towards foreigners. That's not the case at all. But it's what they've experienced in their everyday lives that have radicalized them, that have really hurt them deep down to where they feel like they need to pick up arms and do something about it. I spoke to a retired general who was there in Jalalabad to the south. It's about 40 minutes from the Pakistani border. Who was there the day that one of bin Laden's hideouts was bombed by the coalition. And he took me there and he showed it to me. And it was 3 buildings, and the middle building where they knew was where he stayed and slept was bombed in a surgical strike. Not only the building itself, but the right side of the building where they had intelligence that he slept. And in the same breath, he witnessed that, which was amazing. But in the same breath, he's also witnessed weddings being bombed, funerals being bombed, and just such a huge amount of collateral damage that it leaves you dumbfounded. And I couldn't know what to say to that. These are the things that people are experiencing there. Aside from those perspectives, looking at it from more of a global perspective, thinking about what the current administration is looking at, having experienced what I have there, it's very disappointing to constantly take a view of national security. Building a national army and a national police force is most definitely important, and it will secure the state against outside attack and more traditional threats. But that does very little to secure people on the individual level. People are still living in intense poverty. Their identities have been incredibly fragmented. I mean, there's a great deal of ethnic tensions there right now. I experienced so many ethnic problems while I was there, of classifying people based on their ethnic or even regional ties. They've been fragmented, they've been displaced, their whole lives have completely become shattered. So rebuilding roadways, streets, and 5-star hotels, this does very little for the average person. They don't feel safe, they don't feel independent, and they do resort to relying on militias for safety. And it's disappointing to know that that is not a major focal point. The other thing that concerned me about the strategy that was outlined is that we're very much focused on stamping out Al-Qaeda. And within the community, it's become almost a farce that we're looking to stamp out Al-Qaeda there when we could very much choke them at the beginning of the pipeline, which means cutting off their funding. We know very clearly, it's well known in Afghanistan on the ground where their funding is coming from. We know it's coming from the Gulf. We know it's coming from the post-Soviet states. We know Pakistan has their hands dirty. But, you know, it's a matter of having the political will to stand up and say that. And that's just not something that's happening right now for various reasons. And knowing that, and knowing that that is not addressed, makes people very cynical there. They feel like if you really want to handle this, you will handle it. Why will you go around swatting bees after they've left the nest when you can destroy the nest itself? People wonder this all the time. The other thing that is just common knowledge there, it's a joke in the Pine Share Valley to the north, which is one of the places that was never infiltrated by the Soviets or the Taliban, never fully anyways. It's a joke there that how can the US not see what's happening? Just like we went out of our way to bleed the Soviets while they were there, the same thing is being done clearly to the Americans there. And it's just so obvious to Afghans who have been through it and see exactly what's happening. Might not be the Soviet or the former Soviet states itself, but there's so many different elements that have interest in destabilizing American power.